Hi, everyone. How are you doing today? Thank you so much for making time to join us for this really almost historic meeting. We have been, so my name is Roden Monrose. I'm the CEO and founder of CariClub. So thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited about this meeting because since starting this company, one of the feedback that we always received from nonprofits is that they have a desire to provide the best possible experience for nonprofits. For the young professionals that eventually join their associate boards. But there's not a lot of knowledge out there, knowledge sharing around how to really assemble the best possible associate board and do that effectively. And so we worked with the incredible team at NYU Wagner, who you will get to meet in a few minutes. And they spent a great deal of time, energy, effort, and diligence into being that conduit. They were able to speak with hundreds of nonprofits and get their feedback around what are the best practices for forming associate boards. And I can't wait to share that with you today. And so for those of you that don't know CariClub, CariClub is a tech-enabled platform. We make it easy for corporations to develop and retain their next generation of world-class leaders and culture carriers. We work with some incredible companies like Citigroup, Deloitte, Davis Polk, Morgan Stanley, and KKR to place their high-potential employees on nonprofit boards. These high-performing companies partner with CariClub in order to place their best employees on these leading nonprofit organizations. CariClub's board matching technology removes all of the friction that makes it very difficult for companies to establish a board matching program themselves. Launched a company in 2015, and since then, we've partnered with hundreds of nonprofits and foundations to place their young professionals on boards at no cost to the nonprofit organizations. We're based in New York City, and CariClub is really reimagining what it means for companies to do well and do good. So without further ado, I want to really get you introduced to the main event of this meeting, the NYU team. So please welcome the NYU Capstone team, Rachel Schultz, Gabrielle Gallo, Luke Jones, Emma Rubin. NYU Wagner engages teams of public affairs students to address complex challenges, identify new opportunities, and provide recommendations for client organizations. Over the past year, the Capstone team has worked with CariClub to produce a deep dive research into how an associate board impacts a nonprofit organization, demystifying nonprofit associate boards. Today, Rachel, Luke, and Gabrielle will share their findings with us. Without further ado, I will like the team to take it away. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to learn everything you have to offer today.
Great, thank you so much, Roden. So we'll just have Luke share his screen so we can start the presentation.
You seeing it?
Yes, that's great. Thank you, Luke.
Great.
So hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy during this time. We are really excited to be here today to share with you the high-level summary of our findings from our research done this year on associate boards. And due to these unusual circumstances and of course presenting over Zoom, we're just asking that throughout this presentation, if you have any questions, please type those into the chat function, and we will happily take those questions at the end of the presentation. And additionally, we will be sharing this recording as well as the presentation slides, so don't feel like you need to quickly write down information. You'll be able to look and digest this information on your own time as well. And we wanted to take this time to say thank you to CariClub for giving us this opportunity to present, and really for being such a wonderful partner in our research this year. Additionally, a special thank you to the nonprofits who actually may be here today that participated in our digital surveys and our interviews. We are beyond grateful for your participation, and we're really excited to be presenting today. So to give you all a brief overview of our presentation today, first, Luke is going to go through the literature review. Next, Gabrielle will discuss the digital surveys. I will then discuss the interviews, and lastly, Luke will go through recommendations. So now I'm going to hand it off to Luke to share a brief overview of our research methods and the literature review.
Thanks, Rachel. This is going to be repeat information for a lot of you, so apologies for that. But just to set some context, associate boards, also commonly referred to as young professional boards or junior boards, are really meant to leverage the energy and often the relevant skill set of young private sector professionals to support a nonprofit organization that's well matched to their interests and their passions. But because these boards are still kind of a nascent idea, not much data exists. So our intention was to collect initial feedback from the field regarding nonprofit experiences and reflections on engaging associate boards. And so our data collection was performed starting with a literature review to make sure that we're not creating redundancies with existing information. And then we used that literature review to inform an online survey and then a smaller number of in-person or over-the-phone interviews with individual nonprofit employees. So to give you a little information on the literature review, as you might expect, we received a low yield from academic resources. Most of the relevant information came from popular articles like op-eds or blog posts from nonprofit leadership who generally work closely with their associate board. Some important reflections did come out of that, mostly indicating the most significant perceived contributions of those organizations' associate boards, like diversifying their leadership, bringing a different generational perspective, and really sort of bringing a new energy to revitalize anything that might have felt stagnant. It also indicated some of the factors that leadership felt like led to effective associate board output, and some of the main ones that we highlighted are to provide a varied set of responsibilities, and particularly some high-level deliverables in decision-making. Along the line with that, interaction with the governing board or executive leadership can really add a sense of gravitas, and a sense that these young professionals' time and effort are being respected and taken seriously. And in a similar vein, also associate boards members who are viewed as long-term investments were more often to stay on long-term and to potentially become members of the governing board or to engage leadership in other significant ways. And part of that is providing some flexibility in scheduling and in methods of participation as lifestyle changes are generally more common for that age group. So now Gabrielle is going to take us through some of the results of the survey.
Great, thanks, Luke. So we approached our survey with the goal of better understanding the demographic makeup of nonprofits both with and without an associate board. And to that end, we broke it into 4 segments, obviously organizations with an associate board, organizations without. And we also looked at organizations who had had an associate board in the past but no longer did, and organizations that were in the process of establishing a board. For our respondents, we solicited responses from nonprofit contracts through CariClub and then through our own NYU Wagner network. And we had a response rate of about 25%. So overall, 44% of our respondents do have an associate board. Those with an associate board are more likely to have a larger staff. And for those without a board, they were more likely to be a smaller organization with less than 30 employees. They were also slightly more likely to have a budget under $3 million. So now we're going to take a deep look at organizations with an associate board. So we first wanted to better understand the intended functions of associate boards. A third of our respondents reported fundraising as a function, making it the most commonly reported, although event planning wasn't far behind, with 29% of associate boards involved in event planning, and that could be galas, volunteer events, and so on. Now, while this was a focus in the literature review, only 13% of our survey respondents turned to their associate boards for pro bono skills-based volunteering, such as digital marketing. However, in a post-COVID world, a recent CariClub survey found 69% of nonprofits are in fact seeking skilled-based volunteers. And then other functions from our survey included program ideation and strategy. We then wanted to get a feel for the financial expectations of associate board members, and a large majority of our survey respondents do require a give-get from their members. 59% require a give-get less than $1,000, but 18% do ask that their associate board members bring in over $2,000 to the organization. We also inquired as to the tenure of the organization's associate board members, and the tenure was distributed between 1 and 5 years, but we found not surprisingly, that it often depends on how long the associate board has been active. And to that end, the majority of the organizations we surveyed have relatively new boards, with 42% reporting that their associate boards have only been active for less than 2 years, and only a quarter reported boards that have been active for more than 5. And then in regards to the size of boards, it varied across organizations, but we did find some clusters. Roughly a third have 5 to 10 members, a third have more than 20 members, and a third have 11 to 15 members. As the relationship between associate boards and governing boards was a running theme throughout the literature, we wanted to get a better understanding of how that looked in practice. And we found that only 29% of organizations reported associate board members participating in governing board activities, and only 8% of organizations gave their associate board members voting rights. Relatedly, we inquired as to how many associate board members had moved to the governing board within organizations. 32% reported that 1 to 5 had moved on to the governing board. However, half of respondents reported that none of their associate board members had moved to the governing board. Mentoring was another theme that was mentioned in the literature review. We found that only 26% of our respondents provide a formal mentoring program for their associate board members. For those with a mentoring program, how those programs were structured, it did vary among the organizations. For example, one offered leadership development program, and then another reported that their governing board played an active role in both the recruitment and the onboarding of associate board members. So to better understand how engaged associate board members are, we looked at meeting cadence and attendance. And somewhat surprisingly, we found that the more frequently boards meet, the more likely the organization is to report a high attendance percentage. Of the organizations that hold monthly meetings, 57% reported full or close to full attendance. And the only organizations to report attendance not above 25% were those that met semi-annually. And then lastly, we inquired as to how successful organizations found their associate boards. A large majority, 77%, found their boards to be fairly successful. 14% declared them to not be successful at all, and only 9% reported that their boards were very successful. We cross-analyzed the demographics within those success categories to see if we could tease out any trends. We did find that of the organizations that find their associate boards to be very successful, they tend to be larger organizations, both in terms of budget and staff. But we weren't able to pull out any trends from the other two categories. Now we're going to take a deep dive into organizations without associate boards. And of the organizations without associate boards, the majority have never had a board, nor are they in the process of establishing one. 23% used to have a board but no longer do, and 16% were in the process of putting a board together. So obviously we wanted to get a better understanding of why organizations don't have an associate board. Of those without a board, the most stated reason for why that were limits on staff capacity. Many also stated that they simply didn't know how to begin to establish an associate board or even what an associate board is. For organizations who had previously had an associate board but no longer do, 40% stated that the reason for the dissolution was a lack of engagement. Staff capacity and retention issues were also offered as reasons for the board dissolving with equal frequency. And all three of these causes can potentially be addressed through the implementation of best practices, which Luke will talk about a little bit more when we get to the recommendation section. Again, we wanted to get an idea of the functions of the associate board, or in this case, the expected functions of boards that were in the process of being established. And unsurprisingly, it mirrors those that are already established, with fundraising and event planning frequently mentioned. Similar to what we found in the literature review, however, many organizations stated a need to diversify their leadership, and a desire to invest in future leadership was also given as a reason for establishing an associate board, which again was a thread we found in the literature review. I'm now going to pass it to Rachel, who's going to talk about our interview process a little bit.
Great, thank you so much, Gabrielle. So after the digital surveys, we wanted to dive a little deeper and gather more qualitative information that would really complement those digital surveys we had conducted. We first started with the interview script, and in creating the interview script, we kept these 4 main research questions and goals in mind that you see at the top here. And really the goal of these main questions was to uncover any latent information that may not have been discovered within those digital surveys. The audience, similar to our digital surveys, were organizations with associate boards, organizations without associate boards, and organizations that were in the process of establishing an associate board. And lastly, we solicited responses from nonprofit contacts provided by CariClub, as well as our digital survey respondents who indicated they would be willing to be interviewed, and the Wagner network and our own professional networks. So now Gabrielle is going to briefly review the demographics of our participants.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So our organizations, or rather our interview participants came from organizations that varied across sectors, from health to education to arts and culture. All but 2 of our interview participants do have an associate board. The majority have more than 30 staff members. And the size of the associate board varied greatly. The smallest was just 3 members and the largest went all the way up to 90. However, interviewee respondents with larger boards often said that they felt the large boards were unwieldy, that they tended to have low engagement, and that they tended to hinder the overall success of the associate board. Again, we looked into the function of the associate boards, and very similar to our survey respondents, fundraising and event planning were the most common. There were no real surprises here. In regards to the actual board structure details, all but 2 of the organizations that we spoke with do have a give-get requirement, and those 2 that don't are in the process of establishing one. The requirements range broadly from $100 all the way up to $10,000, with an average of about $1,450. Many organizations also reported having a tiered system for their give-get requirements, usually based on the membership position of the member and their level of participation. Now, 42% of associate boards do interact with governing boards, which we found was higher than our survey respondents. However, none have voting rights. And while many organizations didn't have a formal process in place, they did occasionally host mixers or networking events for the associate board and governing board members to get to know one another. And several noted that associate board members would like more interaction with the governing board. And again, we wanted to get a feel for how engaged associate board members were. So we looked at meeting cadence and attendance. Meeting cadence ranged from monthly to semi-annually, with 42% meeting monthly, and the second most frequently reported cadence being quarterly. 47% reported a high meeting attendance, and only 11% reported low. And often those reporting high attendance also gave their members the option to call in rather than having to attend the meeting in person. And a number of organizations reported that in addition to their regular associate board meetings, members were also assigned or volunteered to committees or subcommittees that met either regularly or as needed on an ad hoc basis. And now I'm going to pass it back to Rachel, who's going to go through the analysis.
Great, thank you again, Gabrielle. So after conducting and documenting all of these 21 interviews, we then executed a thematic analysis. So while familiarizing ourselves with the data and really with each in-depth response, we found these 7 main themes within those responses on the left. Then within those 7 themes, we discovered patterns. We defined and edited those patterns to these 4 most frequent trends on the right. So you'll see those: purpose of an associate board, structure of an associate board, success of an associate board, and tools. So now we're going to actually dive a little deeper into each of these main trends. So in terms of purpose of an associate board, findings here, of no surprise, mirrored what Gabrielle mentioned in the findings of our digital survey, that the majority utilized their associate boards for fundraising and event planning. One important innovative approach worth mentioning was a nonprofit that utilized their associate board to connect existing programs to social impact initiatives. They were most recently linking gender equality to existing programs. And this approach of viewing young professional board members as thought leaders in subject matters of social impact really benefited the nonprofit internally and externally, as well as really developed that relationship between the members, the associate board members, and the nonprofit. And next, we're going to talk through structure and success. So we put these 2 trends together actually because they were consistently relating to one another. Nonprofits with high-performing associate boards had clear structures and clear communication around tasks and expectations, whereas nonprofits who had more disengaged associate boards tended to have less structure surrounding assigning tasks and managing their members. Other structures of nonprofits that led to more successful boards were things like when associate board members had access to governing board members, when the nonprofit really balanced priorities of fundraising and money with volunteering hours, and finally, when the nonprofit viewed the young professional board as an investment. One innovative approach that a few nonprofits utilized was conducting intentional networking events between their associate boards and their governing boards. One nonprofit actually went so far as requiring each associate board member to attend at least one governing board meeting per year. So this was a really interesting way to structure their associate board, and it produced a more successful and engaged board. And lastly here, we're going to talk through tools. The tools utilized by the majority of nonprofits to track performance and success of their associate board consisted mostly of tracking attendance, tracking donations, or tracking the success of an event, usually through tickets sold. Two really innovative approaches, though, to mention were firstly utilizing surveys. So the nonprofit sent surveys to their associate board members to hear directly from them on how the nonprofit can improve and how the associate board member feels they've impacted the organization. Lastly, utilizing the tool of scorecards. So here the nonprofit would send each member their scorecard mid-year to let them know where they stood with their goals, and then publicly recognize members that in the end had met those goals to really reinforce a sense of accountability. So now I'm going to pass it to Luke, who's going to go through our recommendations.
Yeah, thanks again, Rachel. So yeah, we thought it might be helpful to provide a few suggestions for anybody interested in developing their associate board that we felt like really shone through in all three tiers of our research. The first is in sourcing and onboarding. Anecdotally, people found that applicants who really expressed alignment with the mission and vision of the organization were the most effective associate board members. And encouraging volunteering with programs, not just with the board itself, is a good way to build that alignment. One thing that was mentioned was where possible to offer some training, ideally at onboarding, potentially to prime incoming board members for their leadership position. Offering networking events, particularly with governing board members, as we've mentioned, and potentially even hosting members of other associate boards for knowledge or experience sharing with your board are the kinds of things that your associate board members really benefit from and appreciate. And defining roles and board structure, or something like an org chart, giving individual roles or charges to members is helpful for accountability and for clarity for board members. And thankfully, CariClub happens to have just developed a tool for exactly that. The link is nice and easy to remember. It's just associateboards.com. I think that'll be really helpful. And so you can make things simpler and create efficiencies by maintaining one designated point of contact on both the board side and the organization side. And obviously, you don't need to discourage contact beyond that, but having one designated person who's responsible on each end for maintaining lines of communication. Allowing associate boards some participation in meaningful high-level decision-making, even if not with formal voting rights, helps them feel valued and like they have some real equity in the organization. And like we've mentioned, more frequent meeting times led to higher participation. And viewing members as long-term investments usually led to long-term payoff in the form of qualified, capable future leadership. And lastly, keeping track of whatever metrics of success you think are most important. It could be the give-get, events attended, volunteers sourced for your events. Keeping track of those accurately and actively, and then celebrating accomplishments with your board are a really good way to maintain momentum and keep people engaged. All right, thank you very much. We will now take your questions from chat, and we're happy to field any others that you might have. We hope you found that informative.
If I can jump in, I was looking through some of the chat questions, and I saw the question from Miguel about the the percentage of people who had to give, get, and what that meant for the organization. And I do just want to stress that the organizations that reported their the functions of the associate boards all had multiple functions. So none just had fundraising or none just had event planning. And we also found in our research that while fundraising is a very important component of the associate board, it shouldn't be the only way that organizations view their associate board. The associate board members really want to feel as though they're a part of the organization and not that they're just there to raise money. So hopefully that provides some clarity around that question.
Okay, great. So let's see, I'm trying to see. So that was the first question, Gabrielle, that you just answered. I think we see, I'm going through the chat function.
I see there's a question here from Danielle on associate boards and alumni associations. I don't know that anybody that I spoke with, that was a topic that came up. It certainly wasn't something that we addressed in our survey. So I don't know if Rachel and Luke, either of you talked to anybody about that?
I also do not have, nothing's coming to mind about alumni associations. Luke, did you talk to anyone?
I don't think anyone who I spoke to had an alumni association, although I will say anecdotally that, you know, other nonprofits in line with the concept of ensuring some mission and vision alignment, nonprofits who pulled their associate board members from, you know, existing pools of volunteers and people from their existing networks who they knew were mission and vision aligned usually made really good contributions and helped onboard people who were less familiar with the organization, if that helps at all.
Danielle, I see that you have some questions here about balancing engagement and ensuring diversity of the associate board. I'm not quite sure what you mean by balance engagement. So if there's a way for you to expand on that, that would be great. And then we can try to address it. In assuring diversity of the associate board, I mean, I think that really falls to your recruitment and your application process.
Yeah, and you know, similar to research that's available on nonprofit governing boards, as well as corporate boards, more diverse boards make more successful boards. That's true across the board.
Yeah.
I see a question about any advice on recruiting and fundraising events in the context of COVID when everything is remote. That's a tough question because when we conducted all of this research, we were not yet at this point. So I don't know if you guys have anything to offer.
Speak to that a little bit. One of the things I was very interested in, I think, as you mentioned earlier, is that a lot of the nonprofits had to work on transitioning their operations to be more remote driven. And so what we saw was a huge spike in interest for nonprofits that were interested in engaging young professionals for skills-based volunteer opportunities and remote volunteer opportunities. And there are a lot of ways that nonprofits have been innovating on their fundraising strategy and campaigns while leveraging their associate board members who tend to be quite savvy with utilizing social media to generate interest for their campaigns.
Yeah, that's a, oh, sorry, Gigi, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I see the second part of that question was asking about how to keep associate boards. It's saying associate boards work in a cohesive fashion, they're more likely to be impactful, which is very true. And how to do that now that everything is digital. And I think that kind of piggybacks off of what Roden was saying. You know, we're all getting more and more useful to conducting our life like this. So I think it's important to make sure that you're keeping your associate board engaged in an online format. So don't let the associate board meetings stop. Don't let the associate board engagement stop just because you can no longer meet in person. And hopefully that won't be forever.
I'm a member of an associate board, and we have our monthly meetings. They're just converted to Zoom meetings now instead of in person. So it's definitely important to keep the associate board engaged. One of the things I wanted to just also address really quickly, we use some terms in there, and if you have any questions on like what any word means, any phrase means, just feel free to just like post a question. One of the questions that I got was to define give get. And a nonprofit give or get is essentially a means for nonprofits to give the associate board members or even their governing board a fundraising target. So each individual board member is going to have a fundraising target, and that's the reason why it's called a give or get is either you could give that amount of money or give a portion of that money, or you could help get it in the form of for associate boards, you could do it in the form of in-kind contributions, or if you could get your friends and family to donate to the organization and that's attributed to you, that would count towards your give or get. So give or get is a fundraising term to describe how to contribute to the nonprofit.
I see too that Eli has a question on the sizes of an associate board. If we have a recommendation, and is there a detriment to having a very large associate board? Is there an optimal size? I'm going to give you an answer that may not be satisfactory, but it very much depends on your organization. What you need to keep in mind is the capacity of your staff. You want to make sure that your organization can accommodate whatever size that your associate board is. We did find that some that had very large boards did find them kind of unwieldy. They tended to have really low engagement because their staff didn't have the time to keep the board engaged. So I would definitely keep the relativity of your organizational size in mind when you're designing the size of your associate board.
Yeah, and if I can just piggyback off that anecdotally, the people I spoke with in interviews who felt like they had a steady a steady associate board engagement that was consistent, they grew their board intentionally. So their board started small and grew to sort of build its own momentum. And usually it was the associate board who was taking charge of that kind of decision making and deciding a little bit on their own structure, rather than just setting a target of how many people you want and trying to fill that number however you can.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's really not so much about the number, but about what your board can get done in relative to what your organization needs. And to that point, there was a question here about whether or not it's appropriate to ask associate board members to serve as volunteers to develop the organization in whatever way is needed. And we did find that organizations did lean, so that's what we would consider pro bono skills-based volunteering, right? I'm assuming that you would need help in developing your organization, maybe in marketing or something to that extent. And that is fairly common for organizations to ask of their associate board.
And I think it also kind of connected the associate board members to the nonprofit that much more. We talked a little bit about in our presentation, just making sure to engage your associate board members in terms of volunteering and bringing them back to the mission of the nonprofit, because that's really why they wanted to get involved in the first place. So I think that's another important point, even in terms of ways to keep associate board members engaged right now. It's really to bring it back to the mission as well and kind of get them excited about that too. Trying to see if did we miss any questions here?
I see one asking, does CariClub connect young professionals and potential junior boards? If so, how do you add your nonprofit to the CariClub resources? So maybe CariClub team, you can follow up with Jennifer, or if you want to put in a plug to everybody now. And just, I think that adds nicely to the in remote times discussion, because you do have the benefit of a fantastic online platform that has a network component inherent in it, and that's CariClub.
If you haven't already, just go to CariClub.com and request an invite to the platform as a nonprofit. that's going to allow someone from our team to reach out to you and get your organization set up on the platform. So it's pretty straightforward. We make it as easy as possible. You just have to contact us, and we'll take it from there.
And I see this question from Danielle saying, our alumni were mostly of color, and because board members recruited associate board members, that body was less diverse and it created some tensions. And did we see strict age cutoffs for the associate boards? The first part of that question is clearly really important, but I don't remember in my interviews anybody talking about difficulties with board diversity. They all mentioned the diversity of their board and their additions to the organization as a strength. I didn't hear anybody mention they felt like their board had a lack of diversity, which obviously doesn't mean that it wasn't there. But do you guys remember anybody talking specifically about that issue?
No, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, I don't remember anyone saying it was less diverse due to that. I'm trying to think about the strict age cutoff. I think in our literature review, it was kind of around 30 something, almost 40. I don't know, Gabrielle?
Yeah, some did under 30, but most did under 40. But I'm assuming CariClub might have a better idea about that. And going back to the comment from Danielle, it does sound as though if you sourced your associate board members from multiple sources, that may help alleviate that situation a little bit. So that's something to consider.
Yeah. One of the I'd say advantages of working with CariClub to source candidates is that you're not relying on a very specific pool of people who is involved with the organization, because people will recruit people that they know in their immediate circle. And so if the organization starts off with a less diverse group and they're sort of recruiting within their immediate network, that's how you could potentially end up with a group of associate board members that are not very, not as diverse as you'd like. With CariClub, the companies give access to a host of their employees, and there isn't that network bottleneck. Everyone who has access to CariClub will have access to every nonprofit on the platform. So that's one of the things that I'm actually very excited about with the platform, is the fact that we are able to make it easy for everyone to discover those opportunities and get involved.
Let's see.
I see a question from Jack asking, curious if our survey found any pluses or minuses on having subcommittees within the board, and if there were specific types of subcommittees that were more successful. I can say anecdotally that people really enjoyed having those subcommittees. I think that fits into the concept of having a structured board, where you give somebody a title, or give them a specific charge, and generally they feel empowered with it. Is that your assessment as well?
Yeah, I agree. It was definitely a way to boost engagement. And as far as what subcommittees were more successful, it was usually those that were based around very specific tasks, such as events. So a committee that was focused on helping with a gala, or a committee that was focused on building out a new fundraising event, something along those lines. So something with a very clear deliverable, which, as humans, that kind of makes sense, right? We want to be able to deliver something and feel good about it. So yeah.
I see a question from fellow Wagner, Maisha Dickerson, asking if CariClub could provide a space for nonprofit leaders managing associate boards to share ideas of activities, projects they're working on, how they're keeping members engaged. As we mentioned, knowledge sharing is really important. I think that's a priority for CariClub as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We are happy to engage the nonprofit community and continue the knowledge sharing. This is a milestone accomplishment. And again, just the NYU Wagner team did an incredible job doing all that work to present, to get this presentation together. This is really just the beginning of something much greater. This is the first academic research on associate boards ever. So congratulations to the NYU Wagner team on breaking ground there. And we will learn a lot from this and we'll build on top of it. And we would love to engage the nonprofit community to make sure that the growth continues.
I see a question here, which is asking about what are some ways we can pitch mentoring voting rights and weighing in on high-level decision-making, which I'm interpreting as how can we pitch that to the associate board members, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. Rachel and Luke, did any ideas on how the relationship with associate board members and voting rights mentoring was formally structured that you could speak to?
So many people we talked to didn't actually have the governing board and the associate board interact as much. The majority of them were really doing intentional networking events at that time, the ones that we did speak to, which of course right now is a little bit hard to do. There's of course the option to do it virtually, but that would be a little bit hard. And in terms of voting rights, like our digital surveys showed, not many people were offering that. So that's sort of a nascent area as well. We don't really know. Unless, Luke, do you have any insight into that?
Yeah. So yeah, like Rachel was saying, a lot of our surveys and interviews mentioned were people who don't currently, have that formalized, but both the associate board members and the staff members and the governing board members all wanted that to happen. They just weren't quite sure how to get there, and that's, I think, a lot of probably what your question's pertaining to. We just know that people want it to happen. As for how best to make it happen, I can say anecdotally, I remember from two of the interviews, there was one organization where the chair of their associate board attended every meeting, two where the chairs of the associate board attending every governing board meeting to report back to the associate board on governing board activity, and then to sort of provide the opinions and advice of the associate boards on particular issues. And in one of those instances, that associate board member had formalized voting rights on the governing board, and in one instance they did not. But that was just one effective model that we saw. But as for how to, what the best way to engage that was, again, people are still trying to figure that out.
And I think that's where having the opportunity to speak with other associate board managers will really, really help everybody, because you'll be able to learn from one another's mistakes and successes and really get processes established. I do see a question for CariClub here on whether or not CariClub works in Westchester County and in what exact cities you offer your services.
Yep. So we actually work in metro areas, and so Westchester County would fall within the New York City metro area. And if you have an organization out there, we would be able to work with you. We work in other cities across the United States. We are targeting a lot of the major cities, major hubs like your Chicago's, San Francisco, LA. But we are quite open because a lot of the companies that we work with have employees all across the United States. So if you are not in any of our existing hubs, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to work with you to help you recruit folks for your board.
Awesome. And then I see a question here on recommendations for handling associate board members that are far below meeting engagement targets. I would recommend two things. One, you look at it holistically and see if it's one particular associate board member or if it's your associate board members across the board. If it's your associate board members across the board, I would take a look at how you're structuring, whether it's your meetings or your give-gets or your interactions with your associate boards, because it may be an organizational issue rather than an associate board member issue. If it is one associate board member, or one or two, whatever, some of the people that we spoke with, how they were able to get their members back on track was by sharing their metrics with them. So on a quarterly basis, they would share a scorecard or a report with their associate board members. So they would know if they were meeting goals, and if not, they had an opportunity to speak with the staff that would liaise with the associate board. I don't know if Rachel and Luke have any other stories that they want to share along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was exactly what I was going to say, Gabrielle. I think to add to that, also, we've spoke about this quite a bit, but just making sure you're balancing the priority of volunteering hours and really talking about your mission with the fundraising and the sort of money part to it. Just even when you're recruiting members, making sure that they are passionate about the mission and the nonprofit mission statement, because that showed time and time again that that's what really kept those associate board members there, and that's what really kept them engaged a lot of the time. So, there's different ideas, to balance that, but, whether that means you have some sort of structure on you need to volunteer a certain amount of time, or, bringing it back to that would be helpful.
Sorry, I just realized I was still sharing my screen. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think those were.
I see. Oh, go ahead, Luke.
Sorry, no, go ahead, Rachel.
I was going to just say there's another question here about making the jump from the associate board to the larger board. Is there any recommendations for how to structure that transition process? From Hannah. So that is an interesting point. I'm trying to think if we came across that. I think the one, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but having the associate board members attend some of the governing board members meetings to really transition that process could be helpful. We didn't have specific questions that asked about the transition process, but I would assume, that having the associate board member kind of be part of those governing board member meetings sooner would maybe help that jump. Did you guys have any thoughts?
Yeah. I would say too that it's really a metric of a successful board, and that in some ways it will happen as your associate board members age and as they move through their career. Assuming your associate board is successful and your members stay engaged and they're aligned with your mission, then that is something that could happen rather naturally as they progress. Luke, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, we touched on it a little bit, but people who have direct mentorship between an existing governing board member and a member of their associate board, people who really seem like they're expressing interest in future leadership, just having as many touch points as possible between the governing board and associate board. It might not guarantee that transition is going to happen, but it will certainly guarantee that if that transition does happen, that associate board member is going to make a very effective governing board member when they've had that much insight into the process beforehand.
I see Jack was asking a follow-up question on the metrics for the scorecards and reports. And yeah, those some shared them publicly and some just met with the members and spoke with the members directly. So I think it's really a matter of how you would want to structure it. I will say that from like a behavioral science perspective, when people know that their reports are going to be published, they tend to behave how you want them to behave. So it's something to keep in mind.
I think also to add to that, there was the one nonprofit that would sort of celebrate those who did end up reaching that goal. So maybe to condition it in a more positive light, you could do something where you're not kind of like beating down on them, but more celebrating those who actually did successfully meet those metrics that turned out successful for that nonprofit.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rachel, is keeping it more celebratory rather than punitive, for sure.
I'm not seeing any questions that we didn't cover. Are you guys, am I missing?
I don't think so. I think we might.
If there's anything that we missed, sorry, but feel free to repost it in the chat.
I see one question here from Britta. Could you please discuss ideas about how very small organizations can get started? get started, I'm assuming you mean getting started with creating an associate board. Does anyone have thoughts right away when they're
CariClub.
or Luke or Broden even?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, CariClub, you know, is really the only developed resource for this thus far. And just because you're a small organization, I don't think advice for starting would be any different than it would for any other organization, except again, what we mentioned about really taking into account your staff capacity. And, you know, it's probably going to require your associate board to take a little bit more autonomy and kind of design themselves. So, you know, you're just going to want to make sure that they're passionate and engaged. I think I want to, we mentioned at the beginning, but definitely want to give a shout out to our fourth invisible partner, Emma Rubin, who was instrumental in getting all this done. And Emma, if you have anything to add to any of what we've said, want to make sure that you get to chime in with your insights.
While Emma's collecting her thoughts, since she was unexpectedly put on the spot, I do want to add on to Luke's advice for the small organizations, and one being that it's never too early to rely on resources, which is how you should view an organization like CariClub. I want to say again what Luke said, that there is no organization that's really too small. But because you would likely have to lean on your associate board member maybe more than a more established organization would, that places even more of an importance on your application and your vetting process, and making sure that the associate board members are aligned with your mission and that they're going to be able to fulfill the services that you really need as a small and developing organization.
And then this might be a question for CariClub. If you've set up your associate board with CariClub, what is the next step to obtain members for your board?
As long as they've been set up and they have a profile that is open, which allows members to apply, they should be able to receive candidates. But if they haven't seen any activity and they have any more questions, they are welcome to reach out to us, and we will help them figure out what they could possibly do to get more candidates.
Okay, great. And then they see Jody says, does CariClub offer an online discussion forum or other platform for associate boards of different organizations to brainstorm on ideas and knowledge share? So CariClub put me on the spot, but I know that in our last meeting with Renee, that was sort of in the works, and that's a big priority for CariClub.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, so this is essentially the kickoff for that. And we will be engaging more and more nonprofits so that we could do more of that knowledge share and get more engagement.
Perfect. And I think I went through all the questions. Gabriella, Luke, did you see any other pressing questions that we missed?
I think that might be it.
Yeah, and the copy of the presentation will be sent. But yeah, I think we covered all the questions. So thank you so much. I hope this information was helpful. And as we mentioned in the beginning, we will definitely be sharing, or CariClub will be sharing this recording and the presentation slides for you to all review and have to digest a little bit further. And we're really happy and we're really thankful for this year with CariClub and this research that we were able to conduct. So we all hope that you found this helpful.
Thank you so much, NYU Wagner team. We really appreciate all the work that you've put into this. It's very exciting stuff, and you are going to make such a huge impact in the nonprofit world, because this is going to be an important foundation that a lot of organizations could work from to build very effective associate boards. Now that we have at least a baseline to work with, we could really build from there and make sure that every nonprofit has the resources they need to get every associate board into to adopt all the best practices that makes them highly successful. There's definitely an interest on the nonprofits to get to that point, and there are countless young professionals who are eager to get involved. So really bringing all those things together in a way that makes the experience valuable for the nonprofit and the young professional is something that we're committed to at CariClub, and we are excited about what we've just started today.
Thank you so much, Roden and CariClub team. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, we are looking like we just made that time, so we're good. Thank you, everyone. And if anyone didn't have any questions answered, feel free to email us at CariClub. Hello@CariClub is an easy way to reach us, or just go to cariclub.com and we are available. We're there to help.
Great.